Welcome to another deep dive podcast where we try to separate true from fiction.
Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into some pretty deep waters today. We're going to be looking at some expert analysis and discussions all about what's going on in the world right now and how it all might connect to biblical prophecy.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. We're talking about global instability. We're talking about these spiritual currents that are kind of bubbling beneath the surface.
Right.
So today, we really want to bring some clarity. Well, as much clarity as we can to this complex situation, explore a few different viewpoints, and hopefully leave you with something to think about.
Yeah, definitely. For sure. Okay, so to kick things off, let's talk about the recent ceasefire in the Middle East. There seems to be some skepticism about whether it will actually hold.
Yeah, and understandably so. Netanyahu came out pretty strong with a warning about responding forcefully to any violations. So it's clear that, the situation is still very volatile.
Yeah, it feels like everyone's just kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yeah.
And, to make matters even more complicated, you've got this power vacuum within Hezbollah after their leadership was taken out.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Now you have Hezbollah, which is splintered into different factions, all vying for control. And any one of these groups could, they could spark a conflict that would reignite the whole thing.
Right. So basically the Middle East is a tinderbox.
Yeah.
And who knows what's going to happen next?
It's highly unpredictable.
Yes.
And that's the thing about power vacuums. They create this breeding ground for instability.
No.
You never know who's going to step in or what their agenda might be.
For sure. So let's shift gears a little bit. The source material that we're looking at today, it dives into Revelation 17, and it talks about this mysterious woman. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, that's where it gets really interesting. So the expert that we're analyzing, he interprets this woman as representing the fallen state of the world. The wickedness, the sin, that kind of reigns over human hearts. But here's the thing. The beast, which, many people interpret as this oppressive power, it actually hates this woman.
Oh, that's interesting. You would think that something rooted in darkness would be totally fine with something that embodies sin. Why the hatred?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right? Some scholars think it represents a form of self-loathing. Like, even those who embrace the darkness, they have this, revulsion for the very thing that empowers them. Other interpretations suggest that the beast desires complete control over everything, even over the forces of chaos and wickedness.
It's almost like even within these systems of oppression, there's a breaking point, like a level of darkness that even they find repulsive.
Yeah, it really makes you think.
It does, and it kind of ties into this larger theme of global tension that we see running through all of these sources, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, look at what's happening between China, Russia, the U.S., NATO. You've got that incident with the Chinese ship dragging its anchor and cutting those communication cables.
Yeah. And China is claiming it was an accident, but some experts are saying that Russia might actually be behind it.
Oh, wow.
Think about it. If they could disrupt those cables, it would give them a huge advantage.
Right, because it cripples communication between the NATO allies.
Exactly. It's a pretty bold move. It shows just how high the stakes are in this global power struggle.
Yeah. And then you've got Putin launching an ICBM with hypersonic warheads.
Right, which they say our current defense systems can't even stop. It's almost like a warning shot, like, don't even try it.
It definitely feels like it's raising the stakes. And this is all happening as Trump is preparing to return to power.
It's interesting, right? The source material actually suggests that a lot of these global actors, they're making their moves now before he takes office, trying to secure their positions while they still can.
Right, because they're not sure what the landscape is going to look like after he's back in the White House.
Exactly.
And on the domestic front, we've got this DOD memo that has people concerned about the reasonable threat clause.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one because, it essentially gives the DOD broad authority over civilian populations.
Right. But the question is, who decides what constitutes a reasonable threat?
Exactly. And that's the scary part, because that power could easily be misused by future leaders who might not have such good intentions.
Yeah. And then you've got all of these threats against Trump and his team, assassination attempts, bombing threats. It makes you wonder who would benefit from silencing him.
It's definitely a chilling thought. And it leads us right into this concept of the Babylon hour, which the expert seems to think is a pretty critical period centered around December 14th.
Right. He doesn't make any specific predictions, but you can sense the urgency.
Oh, yeah. He's definitely concerned. He talks about the potential consequences if certain events in the Middle East don't play out a certain way. And he even mentions anxieties about nuclear powers in the region and the possibility of a devastating Chernobyl moment.
So we've got global tensions, power struggles, this looming Babylon hour. But the source material doesn't stop there.
Right.
It also talks about all of these strange environmental and weather events happening all over the world.
Right. Yeah. It's like the Earth itself is on edge.
Right, exactly.
There's even talk of a potential meteor storm, an unprecedented meteor storm, and a cycle of darkness based on historical records and new research.
Wow.
And then, of course, you have the whole issue of the melting ice caps, which is already having a real impact.
Right. What kind of impact?
Well, there's the obvious rising sea levels, but then there's also the potential disruption to ocean currents, which could trigger all sorts of other problems, even land eruptions. The expert describes it as us being at a tipping point where things could shift dramatically and very quickly.
Kind of hard to wrap your head around.
It is. He even poses this question. Imagine all the ice gone by the end of 2025.
Wow. That's a scary thought.
Yeah, it's pretty unsettling. And it brings us to this idea of a great unveiling.
Okay, what does that mean?
It's like the world is holding its breath, waiting for some big revelation that could change everything. Hidden truths and realities coming to light.
So along with these environmental shifts, there's this spiritual component.
Exactly. And it's not just about revelations. It's about a growing boldness from those who oppose God.
Right.
A spiritual battle playing out alongside all the geopolitical and environmental turmoil. The expert even goes so far as to say that women walking topless in the streets will be acceptable within 2 years.
Wow.
It's a pretty shocking statement, but it speaks to this potential erosion of societal norms and values.
It definitely makes you think, okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. I think we should take a moment to digest all of this.
Yeah.
And then we'll come back and delve a little deeper after a quick break.
Sounds good.
All right, we'll be right back.
Yeah, we'll be right back. Before the break, we were talking about this great unveiling, this idea that, hidden truths are about to be revealed. Let's dig a little deeper into that. What stood out to you from the source material?
Well, besides that comment about women walking topless becoming the norm, which I'm still trying to wrap my head around, is the whole spiritual dimension of this unveiling. That really struck me. It's not just about governments or technology. It's like a clash of worldviews. Like a battle for our hearts and minds.
Right. It's like a spiritual awakening happening alongside all of this geopolitical and environmental turmoil. The expert even uses the term migration gene to describe what he sees as a survival instinct that's awakening in this generation.
Okay, break that down for me. Migration gene. What does that even mean?
Well, he's not just talking about physical relocation. It's more about a spiritual migration, moving away from old ways of thinking, old paradigms, and towards something new. It ties into this idea that we're witnessing prophecies unfold in real time, like events that were once just stories or warnings are now playing out right before our eyes.
Right. It's like we're living in a movie that we've seen 100 times, but now we're actually in the movie. It's both exhilarating and terrifying. And then there's that whole thing about the Sand King and these shadowy figures pulling the strings behind the scenes. It sounds a bit like a conspiracy theory, but the expert seems to think it's a very real and dangerous force.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that is how it highlights this concept of spiritual warfare. It's not just about human actors vying for power. It's about a deeper struggle against unseen forces that are trying to control the narrative and influence events.
So it's not just happening on some distant battlefield. It's happening in our everyday lives.
Exactly.
In the way we think, the choices we make, the things we believe. It's happening all around us.
And that brings us back to the importance of spiritual preparedness.
Yeah.
The expert really emphasizes being rooted in Christ. He suggests that genuine faith is going to be essential for navigating these challenges, but he also cautions against complacency, especially within the Christian community.
Yeah, he even calls out those who are more worried about avoiding cursing in the media than they are about confronting the darkness that's spreading throughout the world.
It's a pretty sharp critique of what some people call comfortable Christianity. A faith that prioritizes comfort and safety over boldness and action.
It's a good reminder that faith isn't just about what we believe, it's about how we live and the choices we make, especially when those choices are difficult or unpopular. And it sounds like we're entering a time when those difficult choices are going to become increasingly common.
Yeah, and the expert actually suggests that we need to be prepared to make those choices, even when it costs us something. He uses this example of having to declare our faith, potentially even in the face of persecution.
That's a sobering thought. So is he saying that we're going to be forced to choose between our faith and our safety?
Well, it's not necessarily about a black and white choice. It's more about being prepared to stand up for what we believe in, even when it's uncomfortable, or puts us at risk. He's emphasizing the cost of discipleship. The reality that following Christ doesn't always lead to an easy life.
Right, right. It makes me think about those stories of people who risked their lives to hide Jews during the Holocaust. It wasn't easy or convenient, but they do it because they knew it was the right thing to do.
Exactly. And that's the kind of moral courage that we might be called upon to display in the days to come. We might be called upon to stand up for our beliefs, to protect the vulnerable, to speak truth to power, even when it puts us at risk. And that brings us back to this idea of the Babylon hour. The expert doesn't offer any specific predictions, but he paints a pretty bleak picture. A world on the brink of major change. A world where the stakes are incredibly high.
He even uses that analogy of Noah's flood. How the world was so caught up in its own affairs that they were completely oblivious to the danger that was coming. But how do we know if this Babylon hour is a real thing?
Yeah.
I mean, people have been predicting the end of the world forever.
Right. And that's a valid question. It's important to approach all of this with a healthy dose of skepticism and discernment. The expert isn't claiming to have all the answers. He's just presenting one interpretation of current events and biblical prophecy. But whether or not you agree with his conclusions, I think the value is that it prompts us to consider the bigger picture, to examine the signs of the times, and to ask ourselves, how should we be living in light of these potential threats?
So it's not about panicking or buying into doomsday scenarios. It's about being aware, being prepared, and most importantly, living a life that reflects our values, regardless of what the future holds.
Exactly. And that preparation, it involves both practical and spiritual dimensions. Practically, it might mean being prepared for potential disruptions to our way of life, whether that's economic instability, social unrest, or even natural disasters. Spiritually, it's about deepening our faith, seeking wisdom and guidance, and building strong communities of support.
Right, and he specifically mentions prayer as a key element. He suggests that spiritual discernment and guidance are going to be absolutely essential for navigating these uncertain times.
Yeah, it's about staying connected to our source of strength, seeking wisdom, aligning ourselves with what is true and good. And he also emphasizes the importance of community, finding others who share our values, who can support us through the challenges ahead. It's about building resilience, not just as individuals, but as a community of faith.
We're all in this together.
Right.
Fighting for the soul of humanity.
Right.
But is it really that dramatic? I mean, it sounds like we're talking about some epic battle between good and evil.
Well, that's certainly how the expert frames it. He sees this clash between those who embrace truth and those who perpetuate deception, between forces that seek to uplift humanity and those that seek to control and exploit it. And whether or not we buy into the language of spiritual warfare, I think there's a valid point to be made about the choices that we face as individuals and as a society. Are we contributing to a culture of fear and division, or are we working to build a world based on love, compassion, and justice?
Okay, so maybe we don't need to picture ourselves battling demons with swords and shields, but we can at least acknowledge that there are real forces at work in the world, both good and bad, and that we have a role to play in that struggle.
Exactly. And that struggle is multifaceted. It's about confronting the darkness in our own hearts. It's about standing up for justice and righteousness. It's about building a better world, even in the midst of chaos and uncertainty.
And it's about remembering that we're not alone in this fight. We have each other, and we have a source of strength and hope that's greater than any challenge we might face. But what about the environmental changes? I mean, those predictions about melting ice caps and rising sea levels and land eruptions, it's pretty alarming.
It is. It's a sobering picture. And what's even more concerning is how the expert presents these environmental changes as a symptom of a larger spiritual crisis.
It's like the earth itself is groaning under the weight of sin and rebellion.
Yeah, that's one way to interpret it. He sees this environmental degradation as a consequence of our disconnection from God and from the natural world.
It's like we're playing a game of Jenga, and we keep pulling out blocks without realizing that the whole tower is about to collapse.
And that collapse could have catastrophic consequences, not just physically, but spiritually. The expert even suggests that we're entering a time of increased sickness and disease, potentially as a result of radiation and other environmental factors.
Right. He specifically mentions nuclear incidents like Chernobyl and Fukushima, which continue to have ripple effects all over the world. It's a reminder that our actions have consequences, and those consequences can be far-reaching and long-lasting.
It is. It's a reminder of our interconnectedness. and the need for a shift in consciousness. We need to move away from this kind of short-sightedness and self-interest that has led us to this point.
It's about recognizing that we're all connected, that we're
Yeah.
part of a larger ecosystem, and that the choices we make today will affect generations to come.
And that recognition needs to extend beyond just the physical environment. It needs to encompass the spiritual and moral dimensions of our lives as well.
So it's about understanding that true prosperity and well-being are rooted in something deeper than material wealth or technological advancement.
It's about aligning ourselves with those eternal principles of truth, justice, and love that have always been the foundation of a truly thriving society.
That's a tall order, especially with all of the forces that we're up against. But it sounds like the expert believes that it's not only possible, it's essential if we want to navigate this Babylon hour.
And that belief is grounded in faith, not just some vague sense of hope, but a very specific and personal relationship with the divine, He believes that by aligning ourselves with God's will and purposes, we can tap into a source of strength and wisdom that will guide us through these turbulent times.
So it's about trusting that there's a plan, even when we can't see it.
Yeah.
And that we're not alone in this journey.
Exactly. It's about drawing strength from that source of power and wisdom and allowing it to guide our steps, even when the path ahead seems dark and uncertain.
There's definitely a lot to ponder here. Maybe we should take a moment to let all of this sink in before we move on to the final takeaways from this deep dive.
I agree. Let's take a moment to reflect on what we've discussed, and then come back ready to explore what it all means for us moving forward.
So we've covered some pretty heavy stuff in this deep dive. Global tensions, prophecies, spiritual warfare, all this talk of potential upheaval. It's a lot to take in.
It is. It really is.
So, what are we supposed to make of all this? What are the key takeaways? What's the point?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is that even with all the chaos and uncertainty, there's a call to action. This expert, he doesn't just present a doom and gloom scenario.
Right.
He offers a way forward, a way to navigate these challenging times with courage and hope.
Yeah, he talks a lot about being spiritually prepared.
Right, exactly.
Grounding ourselves in our faith. Seeking guidance from something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, it's about cultivating this inner strength and resilience so that we can weather the storms, whatever those storms might be.
Right. And it's not just about personal survival either.
No, not at all.
It's about recognizing how interconnected we are. Our choices have an impact.
Absolutely.
We have a responsibility to build a better world.
Even when it's hard.
Even when it's hard. Even when it feels impossible. It reminds me of that quote by Gandhi, "Be the change you want to see in the world." It's so easy to get caught up in the negativity, But we all have the power to make a difference.
We do, even in small ways.
Yeah, even in small ways.
It's about focusing on what we can control, on cultivating love, compassion, courage, becoming beacons of light in a world that often feels very dark.
Choosing hope over despair, action over apathy, faith over fear.
And remembering that we're not alone, we have each other, and we have a source of strength that's always available if we just tap into it.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what do we leave our listener with?
I think we leave them with a choice.
Okay.
A choice to either give in to fear and despair or to rise to the occasion, embrace the challenges.
It's like we're living in extraordinary times.
We are.
And that requires an extraordinary response.
It does. It's about stepping into our power, not to control or dominate, but to serve the greater good, to heal the world.
To be the change we want to see, even when it's hard, even when it's scary, even when it feels like everything's falling apart.
Because, it's in those moments of greatest challenge, that our true character is revealed.
And that's when we have the opportunity to really make a difference.
Exactly.
So one final thought-provoking question for our listeners as we end this deep dive. What if this Babylon hour isn't just about global events? What if it's about a personal reckoning? A time when we all have to face the darkness within ourselves and choose a path of light.
What if this isn't the end? What if it's just the beginning of a new chapter, which we each have the chance to write a story of hope, resilience, and transformation?
It's a powerful thought. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.